Tonight, I yield my time to Rev David Miller.
Good evening. When I was here last, I listened carefully to the arguments on either side of the family life education curriculum. I was surprised how often folks on one side of this argument cited what God thought or wanted when it came to the language and concepts under discussion. I wish through the years that I was amazed at how many times I've heard an interpretation of what God wants when people were talking about politics and social issues, but I'm not. We are living in difficult times. There's so much polarity in our politics, polarization in our religion, and as much as some would like it to be so, there's no ownership on what God wants. I do not presume to know what God wants, but I have always believed that if God is involved in our lives, then why do we think that God supports one specific side? We are facing some big questions right now in this world. Are we going to be more open and loving? Are we going to be more accepting of people for the beauty in their hearts and in their souls? Are we going to use language and concepts that reflects changing perspectives and new understandings of the human condition? Or are we going to continue this current movement in society backwards, relying on philosophies and theologies based on fear and intolerance, a closed version of God's love, a presumption of who is in and who is out? I myself think if God's love is apparent in the world, it wouldn't be given in the most narrowly defined way possible. It would be expansive, especially for those who are seen by the mainstream as different, especially by those who have historically been on the margins of society. I am grateful for each and every one of you on this board who's made various sacrifices to serve our community. And I'd like to thank you especially for the time when what you do helps to serve everyone, including especially those most vulnerable, especially those who often suffer at the hands of systems that can demand adherence and obedience, and not the celebration of uniqueness and the beauty of each individual. It feels right now like we're in a struggle for the soul of this country. I'd like to encourage the board to come down on the side of inclusion, of celebration, of expansive understanding, of embracing love, and an evolving, forward-thinking, and an inclusive version of public policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Laura Bryant Hanford.
Good evening. I'm a mom of 5, and I thank all of you wearing purple or green because we came here tonight because we love our kids. And it is true that Jesus said that the truth will set us free, but these recommendations imprison students in half-truths and lies. Let's start with the science. Biological sex is not a mistake, it's not a stigma, it's not a choice. FLECAC conflates an extremely rare disorder which does require assignment with gender dysphoria. Like saying some kids are colorblind, so we're going to teach kids that color does not exist. FLECAC voted to use a term based on a view that biological sex is meaningless. Well, I'm a determined researcher. For months, I've been reading the medical literature and talking to clinicians inside and outside FCPS. So I asked for input from a renowned PhD molecular geneticist, and he said, there's a rich medical, legal history behind the use of objective measures, including biological sex. If one was to use the standard sex assigned at birth, one would rightfully be driven out of medicine. You said this term is endorsed by every major medical organization. Really? Google it. See if you can find one that has a policy endorsing the use of sex assigned at birth instead of biological sex. Just one. Let's dig a little deeper. Let's say the American Association of Pediatrics has 64,000 members. They've been quoted. Well, their position paper on transgender care, which does not endorse this as a policy, requires approval not by 64,000 members, but by about 6. So what is true is that thousands of medical professionals in Virginia alone have directly endorsed the position that sex is not assigned at birth. FLECAC has actively suppressed critical medical information, voted 12 times against giving kids critical information about gender transition and the enormous risks, including persisting suicide, and many other things, including risks of birth control. FLECAC has chosen to support ideology over biology, and it's broken. Community input is overwhelmingly against these recommendations, 5 times more against than for. January was the first formal opportunity to review the new lessons, but as soon as I questioned the doctrine, I was out, replaced by an ideologue who would spearhead the effort to completely suppress all debate and discussion of this issue, though it was the first time these lessons had been reviewed. That's a textbook play of authoritarian regimes, which was my background. Ironically, 20 years ago, Gamal Mubarak gave me 3 hours to engage him on an oppressive law. This committee voted against giving me 3 minutes to discuss my own motion. So I'm asking you tonight, teach science, not ideology, and put the same level of effort into engaging your community as you have into suppressing it. Thank you.
The next speaker is Reverend Dr. Deborah W Hefner. The next speaker is Reverend Dr. Deborah W Hefner.
Good evening. I'm the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Reston, and I have been a sexuality educator for more than 40 years. Prior to coming to serving my church in Northern Virginia, I was the president of the Religious Institute for 15 years and the president of the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States for 12 years. I am also the author of 3 books for parents on talking to children and teenagers, as well as being a mother myself. I want to applaud the proposal of the committee to update the existing curriculum to be more inclusive of transgender students by using the language sex assigned at birth and to including information about PrEP as part of STI prevention. Surely, all of us can agree that school-based programs should be age-appropriate, medically accurate, and up-to-date. Education that is based on such information respects and empowers young people and has more integrity than education based on incomplete information, out-of-date terminology, and fear-based tactics. The proposed language changes are more inclusive of our LGBTQ students than the current curriculum. As a faith leader who believes that sexual and gender diversity is a blessing, and who just chaired Reston's first Pride Festival, attended by over 1,200 people, I applaud these recommendations. Sexuality education must benefit all young people, all of our young people, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, or their gender expression. We must assure that all of our young people receive the information and education they need, not just now, but for their future, so they can make responsible sexual decisions. As a religious leader, I have a scriptural and theological commitment to truth-telling, including truth-telling about sexuality. I am joined by millions of people of faith and thousands of clergy from diverse denominations in our belief that young people need comprehensive, accurate, and up-to-date sexuality education. There is no research to support ignorance and incomplete education. There are decades of studies that show that young people who receive education that includes information about abstinence, contraception, and STI prevention are more likely to delay having sex and more likely to use methods when they do become sexually involved. Others will talk to you tonight about the public health arguments that support the proposed changes. I'm going to ask you to also consider the universal values that underlie these changes, that our curricula should honor truth-telling, that they should be inclusive of all of the children in our school, and they should provide the most current information. Surely we can all agree that we want our young people to learn about sexuality from trusted educators, not the internet, not entertainment media. May you, this school board, be truth-seeking, courageous, and just in your efforts to provide all young people with the sexuality education they so urgently need. Thank you.
The next speaker is David Aponte. David Aponte.
Good evening to the members of the Fairfax County School Board, Dr. Brabrand, school staff, and the Fairfax County community. My name is David Aponte, and I am the co-chair of Glisten Nova, an organization dedicated to creating safe and affirming schools for all, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. I'm here to speak in support of the sensible, reasonable recommendations from the Family Life Education Curriculum Advisory Committee regarding lessons in grades 8 through 12. A little over a month ago, I spoke to you on this very topic and discussed the real impact that language changes such as this one, such as the ones proposed, have on specifically trans and intersex youth. Sex assigned at birth is not a made-up phrase by any political organization. It is not a part of some agenda, and it is certainly not designed to distort science or lead young people away from it. I'd like to directly quote an issue paper on human rights and intersex people from the Commissioner for Human Rights within the Council of Europe in saying, "A strong fear of stigmatization and social exclusion forces most intersex people to stay in the closet even when they become aware of their sex. Moreover, society remains largely ignorant about the existence of intersex people since hardly any information is made available to the public about the matter. Consequently, for many years, the human rights problems affecting intersex people's well-being were either unknown or ignored. Ignorance and allowing people to be who they actually are is what this is all about. Strong education fights ignorance. Changing language like this will not lead to confusion for young people, just like protecting students on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity and expression did not lead to a loss of privacy for students. Just like mentioning LGBTQ+ issues in family life education did not lead to an epidemic of students changing their identities. The accusations that have been lobbed at the FLECAC, the school board, and organizations like Glisten are baseless, detrimental, and simply false. The same people making the most noise against this change are the same people that we had to protect our own student representatives from at previous school board meetings. These are the same people who gave us the proof we needed that LGBTQ+ students deserved and needed specific mentions in the school's non-discrimination policy. The recommendations made by the FLECAC are in line with society's progression on language when it comes to these issues. What they have proposed is not radical in any way. It is, however, meaningful. What it means for an intersex student is an affirmation that being who they are is not wrong. What it means for a trans student is an affirmation that the school they attend is learning too, and it's keeping up with science. What it means for any student, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity and expression, is that their school can be a safe place for education, not just for the students, but for the whole community. One of the 3 key words for Fairfax County Public Schools is thrive. Isn't that what we are trying to do? I believe that you all truly are. I thank you for your leadership on this issue, and I hope that you'll support these recommendations.
The next speaker is Shyam Munchie. Shyam Munchie.
Good evening. You've each heard from us separately previously, so tonight we'd like to talk to you as together as parents, FCPS parents.
Our daughter is not transgender because she's allowed to be, or because her parents are liberal hippies. It's not because she just wants to be a girl.
She's not transgender because she's allowed, because it's a fad or a trend or an attention getter. Not because she read a book about being trans, and most importantly, for tonight at least, she's not transgender because she learned about it in the FLE program.
I've thought so much about what it must be like to be transgender. Because I'm not, of course, I'll never really know. But because I'm an advocate for our daughter and kids like her, and I'm countering the hateful nonsense I hear about it being a mental illness, I'm constantly trying to figure out a way to make it make sense to others.
So my comparatively minor analogy is the jolt I experience when I look in the mirror sometimes to see a bald guy. But that's easy, right? I could put on a hat. What I can't imagine fully is that jolt if I'm told I cannot or should not try to align my internal and external appearances.
Here's another analogy. We're only aware of oxygen when there is none. We don't feel a discomfort, a struggle to breathe, except in its absence. I assume that's how it feels to be transgender, to feel a sense of discord between how the world sees you and how you see yourself.
The proposed changes in the language of FLE instruction defines what it means to be transgender. It does not offer medical advice, encourage students to change genders, or suggest that being transgender comes with no consequences or no need for professional support.
Our daughter is transgender because it's who she is. And because of that, we have supported her the way any responsible parent would. We have taken her to experienced and trained professionals who have cared for her medical and emotional well-being. It is not as if she came to us at 6 years old and said, "I'm a girl," and we and the medical profession supported irreversible measures. It's not like that.
So I ask you to be aware of those well-funded vocal minority groups generated outside Fairfax County that are trying to derail the narrative. Resist the urge to listen to discredited organizations like the American College of Pediatrics, which has 500 members, and instead heed the advice of the 65,000-member American Academy of Pediatrics and countless other reputable professional organizations.
This is about our diverse FCPS community. It's about respect for our students. It's about best practice and using the most current research that overwhelmingly supports the term sex assigned at birth to steer how we educate the kids in our classrooms.
So we will keep telling our story with our daughter's permission, of course. We know that it matters, and we know that it will ultimately make the difference. Thank you.
The next speaker is Catherine Velkoff.
Good evening. My name is Kat Velkoff, and I'm a graduate of Poplar Tree Elementary School, Rocky Run Middle School, and South Lakes High School. I will first ask those of you who are standing to please sit. I feel that standing for speakers can be divisive. There is a lot of tension in this room tonight, but there is also a lot of love. That love comes from all the parents in this room on both sides of the issue, reaching out to support their children and the children of this county. Every single parent here loves their child. Please allow me to share a story about my family's love. In 2011, my sister was studying in France. My mom was working full-time, and my dad was running for this school board. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from a suicide attempt. They couldn't pump my stomach because it had been too long, and they were in constant contact with poison control because my liver was shutting down. Unfortunately, I was allergic to the antidote they gave me, and I broke out in hives all over my body. They gave me stimulants to control the hives. My mom asked the doctor what they would do if the stimulants didn't work, and they had to take me off the stimulants and the antidote. And the doctor said, "Then we pray." My mother slept in a chair in the hospital for 2 weeks because she loves me. I think every parent in this room on both sides would do the same thing. I am here tonight because no other family should go through what mine did, and no children should go through what I did. Thankfully, I am now under the care of an excellent psychiatrist, but not everyone gets the help they need in time. According to the National Institute for Health, approximately 32 to 50% of trans people attempt suicide, and that rate is closer to 50% among trans youth. Lack of social and family support for trans youth increases suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. Trans youth with family support are 82% less likely to attempt suicide. Trans youth whose parents reject their gender are 13 times more likely to attempt suicide. Let me be clear. Using language that is inclusive of queer, trans, non-binary, genderqueer, and gender non-conforming people is suicide prevention. Tonight, I ask you to vote to use the language sex assigned at birth, and I will end on a reminder from history. It was white people who decided that blacks could be free. It was men who decided that women could vote. It was straight people who decided that gays could marry, and it will be cis people who decide the fate of trans people in America.
The next speaker is Risa Mae.
We moved from another state into Fairfax County in the summer of 2013. My youngest daughter was a rising fourth grader. I was a bit nervous about that first week of school because not only was she going to be the new girl, she was going to be the new girl wearing boys' clothes. I didn't have to worry, it was fine, nobody cared. In sixth grade, one of her good friends told his friends he was gay. And that wasn't a big deal either, and he's now out in middle school and still no big deal. One of her good friends these days is trans. Nobody makes a big deal about that. They are, however, very excited about the fact that she loves baking and shares her experiments with her Spanish class. I am so grateful for the wonderful children of this county who accept each other for who they are. They know that their differences are far less important than the fact that they are funny, smart, and kind. I'm very grateful to all of the teachers and administrators who serve as role models for this perspective, leading by example. The language of our FLE curriculum needs to demonstrate the same care and support for all children. In this curriculum, children consider their life experiences, how they identify themselves, and how they relate to the people in their lives. It is crucial that we explicitly support them by giving them the language to do that freely, while affirming their value as individuals and as members of our families and our community. Please, let's use lessons and language that make our children, all of our children, feel valued for who they are. For this reason, I support replacing the words biological gender with sex assigned at birth. I also support including information about PrEP in our FLE curriculum, because an important part of showing children that they matter is providing them with information that keeps them safe as they continue to explore who they are and find their place in the world. We all know that's not easy. Let's not make it any harder. Thank you.
The next speaker is Gordon Baer.
Oh, before I start, I'd just like to clarify something that was said by Laura Hanford. It took me literally seconds to find medical associations that use sex assigned at birth on this phone with such poor data. So let's cast that aside. I'm Gordon Baer. I am the full product of an FCPS education. Groveton Elementary, go Tigers. Sandburg Middle, go Panthers. And West Potomac High School, go Wolverines. And I am here to ask you to pass the FLE updates and to not try and stick in that perennial opt-out rider, because that's just doing no one a good service. I became an LGBT advocate when I came out at 14, and it became very clear to me that I wasn't being attended to, and a lot of my LGBT peers weren't being attended to in the same way that our heterosexual counterparts were. Wasn't their fault, it was the system at hand. So I was a GSA president, a student leader, tried to push things along, and here I am today, a community member, and someone who hopes that with this passage, a lot of the anti-LGBT violence that I experienced in the school system, and many of my peers did, will dissipate with visibility. Seeing yourself in, well, not seeing yourself in family life education it's like you're invited to a party and you don't know anyone there and you don't know the theme, and you come out of it very confused because it doesn't really relate to you. So having something in there that will be able to be useful for LGBT youth as they live their authentic lives moving forward from FCPS will be a huge boon. I will say, as an LGBT advocate, I had to learn that sometimes parents don't love their children. And I'm saying love as in that William Barber, Bishop Michael Curry, unconditional, divinely inspired, good love, and not conditional affection, which is different. And I just want to say, it's the children of the people who hate LGBT people the most that are the most vulnerable to a lot of the things that the updates will address. So with the rest of my time, I'd like to have a moment of silence for the victims of anti-LGBT violence and the individuals responsible for making sure that system stays in place. Thank you.
The next speaker is William Elledge.
Hi, my name is William Elledge, and I am an active voter. My daughter has attended Greenbrier, Rocky Run, and Chantilly. I have generally been impressed with FCPS. I'm very pleased to hear the proposed changes to the FLE curriculum. The proposed changes are positive. In my 3 minutes, I'm going to speak about 2 points regarding the transgender inclusive language changes. The first is eliminating isolation and social stigma, and the second is about my religious beliefs. First, regarding isolation and social stigma, 41% of transgender people have attempted suicide, 41%, while 4.6% of non-transgender people have attempted suicide. Why the difference? Transgender youth face discrimination and feel isolation. The proposed wording changes promote inclusion of transgender youth. The changes will help them feel accepted. The changes will encourage them to seek help should they need it. Even if you don't accept transgender identities, open up the wording in the FLE so these children feel more comfortable going to someone instead of taking their own lives. Second, much of the discussion about transgender issues is centered on religion, so you can't ignore it. I was raised in a religion that teaches that being transgender is a sin. But I've grown and learned that being transgender is natural and healthy. Depending on how biblical text is translated, Ruth, David, and the centurion may have been gay. Paul may or may not have preached about against homosexuality, but he also taught women should not speak and nor have authority over men. Jesus never spoke out against homosexuality, and again, depending on translation, may have said some men are born gay and transgender. If it was a sin, he surely would have said something. Instead of shunning those different than himself, Jesus asked a Samaritan woman for water at Jacob's well. For those of you who are so inclined, I'm asking you to follow Jesus' example of loving everyone, no matter how different they are. You don't get to determine what is a sin. You certainly don't get to be the judge. Yes. Now, I live in the Sully district. Mr. Wilson, I encourage you to change your viewpoints on this matter. And I might also point out, when you responded to my email, you didn't actually tell me what your viewpoint was. I introduced myself by saying I'm an active voter. I actually like knocking on doors, informing voters about what our elected officials have done, and you have an opportunity to get this canvasser carrying a clipboard with your name on it. My email's in your notes. For those of you who vote for the proposed changes, please reach out to me when you're up for re-election. I will knock on doors for you. I'd like to thank you for your time and effort, especially on behalf of the FCPS students. Lastly, I hope to thank you for your vote on inclusive language.
The next speaker is Hope Wojciak.
Jesus loves sinners, not sin. And you should know.
He likes silence
Order.
Good evening. As a Fairfax County resident and FCPS parent, I'm here to voice my opposition to the FLE committee recommendations and urge you to adopt the recommendations laid out in the dissenting opinion instead. I oppose the recommended change from biological sex to sex assigned at birth because biological sex is the medically and biologically accurate term to use when referring to a person's sex, which includes chromosomes, hormones, and internal and external reproductive organs. A person's sex is not something that is assigned at birth or otherwise. It is established at conception when an egg is fertilized and a new set of DNA is formed, with chromosomes XX for a female or XY for a male. This is what students are taught in biology classes and should remain consistent throughout the curriculum. This board should not support and promote students being taught something that is untrue and inconsistent with human biology. The FLE committee justified this change from biological sex to sex assigned at birth by claiming that the medical community now uses this phrase. As someone who very recently gave birth, I can say that this is absolutely untrue. My 5th son is only 5 weeks old. When I was 13 weeks pregnant with him, I elected to have a blood test that would detect chromosomal abnormalities. From that blood test, the doctors were able to locate my child's DNA, and from that, they were able to determine that the child I was carrying had XY chromosomes and therefore was a boy. The results sent to me stated exactly this, quote, "It's a boy. Results consistent with 2 sex chromosomes XY." My son's sex was further confirmed at a 20-week ultrasound. At no point during my pregnancy did the doctors, nurses, sonographer, or anyone else within the medical community use that phrase or insinuate that my son's sex would be assigned once he was born. They all referred to him as a boy, even before his birth. Proponents of this change think that biological sex is meaningless, a statement made by the committee member who proposed the change. I happen to think that biological sex is very meaningful. Knowing a person's biological sex allows a doctor to accurately diagnose that individual. A person who presents to their doctor with abdominal pain will have a very different diagnosis depending on whether he or she is a biological male or female. Our biological sex is also important for reproduction. Only a biological male and biological female can create another human being. I assume that the FLE lessons already discuss the differences between a person's gender identity and biological sex. As such, there is no need to remove and render a scientific term like biological sex meaningless in the eyes of students. It is not meaningless. Again, I ask that you adopt the recommendations in the dissenting opinion and make FLE opt-in, requiring written parental consent to participate. Currently, students need written parental consent to take medication in school, go on a field trip, or watch a PG-rated movie. Fairfax County's FLE program goes well beyond the facts of puberty and human reproduction, and it's time for Fairfax to genuinely partner with parents on this topic and require written parental consent for these very controversial lessons. Silence does not equal consent. Thank you.
We now have 5 video testimonies. The first video testimony is presented by Meg Kilgannon.
I'm submitting this letter on behalf of the American College of Pediatricians, the American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs, and the Christian Medical and Dental Society. We treat thousands of young women and our young people in our offices face to face. We see up close the negative consequences of premature sexual activity that are borne out by national statistics. Sexuality education that demonstrates long-term efficacy in assisting parents to promote optimal adolescent health should be welcomed by all. Effective sex education curricula emphasize how to achieve the highest attainable standard of health through risk avoidance. Abstinence from all sexual activity is the only 100% effective way for teens to avoid pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, and associated emotional disorders. Sexually abstinent teens make significantly healthier life choices than their sexually active peers. Sexual risk avoidance curricula emphasize the benefits of sexual abstinence and have been shown to increase sexual abstinence without diminishing contraceptive use among youth who are already sexually active. Recommending PrEP as a safe and effective way for adolescents to be sexually active and avoid HIV infection is negligent at best. Despite PrEP's recent FDA approval for adolescents in high-risk groups, such as teenage boys who have sex with men, rigorous, large, long-term studies of PrEP in adolescents have not been done. There's only one American study that examined PrEP use among adolescent boys who have sex with men. The study followed 78 teen boys for just under 1 year. The boys were paid $50 to $75 per doctor visit to participate in risk behavior counseling, receive the necessary blood work to monitor side effects, and document drug intake. Among these paid participants, only 22% of boys complied with the proper dosing based on their blood work. This is a reflection of the cognitive immaturity of all adolescents and their inherent tendency to underestimate risk. In fact, it's very likely that widespread use of PrEP in this age group would trigger risk compensation, in which individuals gain an inflated sense of security and subsequently engage in riskier sexual activity than they would otherwise would. Sex is an innate biological trait established by the DNA contained in sex chromosomes at fertilization. Sex declares itself in utero. It is recognized and acknowledged at birth. Sex is not assigned. Gender refers to the stereotypical social roles associated with sex. Gender is not an innate biological trait. Gender identity refers to a person's awareness of being male or female. Gender identity is a cognitive and psychological trait that exists in the mind. In sum, as physicians dedicated to promoting optimum adolescent health, we urge the Fairfax County School Board to reject the proposed revisions to its family life education curriculum.
The next testimony is presented by Monique Baruti.
As an engineer, I object to the term sex assigned at birth. It is simply not scientifically factual. There is a major problem with the disconnect between teaching children facts about biology and then lying to them to say that sex is assigned at birth. Since the introduction of ultrasound technology and its increased use throughout American hospitals starting in the 1970s, parents have had the opportunity to learn the sex of their child in utero. Science is a pretty amazing thing. As an athlete, I object to the term sex assigned at birth. I have participated in amateur athletics since the age of about 7, starting with synchronized swimming, eventually racing swimming, running, and a couple of triathlons too. In most sports, there are different categories for males and females because we are biologically different. The different categories serve to make a level playing field. In the 2018 Boston Marathon, for example, 141 males finished before the fastest female. If females are required to compete against biological males, then the equality females have been fighting for decades will be eroded. Transgender students have a right to compete in sports, but what they are being given is an unfair advantage. Girls shouldn't have to lose out on opportunities to males. Girls deserve better than that. As a mother who has suffered pregnancy loss, I object to the term sex assigned at birth. Over the last 10 years, I have helped many women who have suffered pregnancy loss find healing. If a family suffers the death of their child before it is born, and it never had the opportunity for someone to assign its sex upon birth, is the baby any less their son or daughter? Using the term sex assigned at birth takes away from the humanity of the unborn child. Having delivered 3 preterm babies myself, I can assure you of the humanity of the unborn. As a woman, I object to the term sex assigned at birth. I reject the idea that biology is meaningless and that a man can simply change his genitals, take some hormones, and declare that he is the exact same thing as me. He is not. He will never be able to conceive and bear children as I have. I am a woman. I have made many sacrifices to carry and bear my children as a result of the gift of my womanhood, and I won't let anyone cheapen that. I am more than the makeup I wear or the clothes that I put on. We can help children who identify with a different gender embrace their authentic selves without requiring the distortion of the meaning of sex for every child. Our children deserve biology, not ideology.
The next video is presented by David Hatcher.
Good evening. I would like to provide feedback on the FLECAC annual report. The FLECAC is now recommending teaching the scientifically inaccurate FLA material, sex assigned at birth. The new definition is misleading as children born with ambiguous anatomy are astronomically rare and do not represent normal human variation of the two human sexes. It is also scientifically inaccurate as sex is assigned by chromosomes soon after conception occurs and is physically permanent. Lastly, it is deceptively used to portray that people with the rare psychiatric disorder gender dysphoria can choose their sex if they feel like it. Gender dysphoria is more common among children than adults. Up to 90% of children with gender dysphoria have been found to desist. Such by adulthood, 99.99% of the population is aligned with their natural biological sex. Because so many children desist naturally, it demonstrates they do not have opposite sex brains, nor are born in the wrong body. Adults with gender dysphoria have been found to have a super high suicidal rate of 40%. The treatment options for children with gender dysphoria are wait till adulthood to see if persistent, where up to 90% of the gender dysphoric children have been found to desist and align with their biological sex, or to implement the Dutch protocol and transition early. Children who transition early and given puberty blockers appear to have a higher rate of persistence. Those who undergo gender reassignment surgery still have an astronomical long-term suicidal rate 19 times higher than the general population. The wait-and-see method minimizes risks to children because up to 90% of gender dysphoric children are reported to desist naturally, which places them in the lowest suicide rate pool. Transitioning early may dramatically increase the number of suicides, as it may interfere and reduce the number of children who would desist naturally and instead place them into the persistent pool with potentially higher suicide rates. While those who undergo gender reassignment surgery still have a super high long-term suicidal rate 19 times higher than the general population, the harmful impacts from attempts to transitioning early may take 30 years to completely study, which makes it an experiment. Experimenting on children is morally wrong and potentially illegal. The wait-and-see approach should be encouraged as a large majority will naturally desist and lead to the lowest suicide rate. And many experts question the moral and ethical use of the Dutch protocol, including giving chemicals to developing children. There is also a growing concern of the harmful social contagion to the general student body by normalizing and glamorizing dysphoria. The bottom line is schools should not engage in high-risk and harmful experiments. In summary, it is recommended that the school board not adopt scientifically inaccurate and misleading sex assigned at birth in the FLE. Instead, they should support the wait-and-see approach for gender dysphoria as the best way to reduce depression and suicides. And lastly, they should remove gender identity from all school policies and regulations as it is a medical issue like many others.
The next video is presented by Rodrigo Velasquez.
Good evening, members of the school board. My name is Rodrigo Velasquez. I'm a resident of Springfield, Virginia, and a proud product of Fairfax County Public Schools, having attended elementary, middle, and high school here in the county. The reason for my message today is to provide input on two very important topics, both related to the Family Life Education Curriculums Advisory Committee. The first is regarding pre-exposure prophylaxis, also known as PrEP. PrEP is a once-daily pill that greatly reduces the risk of contracting HIV. It's important that all students are aware of PrEP because a couple years ago, HIV was not only greatly feared, but greatly misunderstood. Now, thanks to the hard work of many in the medical profession, we now have ways to not only treat HIV, but prevent the spread of it. Educating all students about PrEP is something that would greatly benefit our community's health. The second topic is regarding the use of the term sex assigned at birth. Not only is that term used by many in the medical profession, but more importantly is something that's preferred and wanted by many in the LGBTQ community. We may disagree on some things that I shared, but I know we can all agree that we want to do what's best for all students. Well, all students includes all LGBTQ students. And all students includes everyone who should be educated around the topic of PrEP in the Family Life Education curriculum. I hope that every member of the school board supports the education of PrEP and the use of the term sex assigned at birth. I know that together we can work to create and foster more welcoming classrooms. By doing so, we're going to greatly benefit many students in our county. The same students who are future business leaders, our future educators, our future community members, which include our neighbors, people that we walk and talk down the street with. So I hope and I greatly, greatly urge every member of the school board to support the education of PrEP in our classrooms and the use of the term sex assigned at birth in our curriculum. Thank you very much.
The last video testimony is presented by Omar Rahim.
Yeah, my name is Omar Rahim. I'm a Muslim American. I'm a disabled veteran in the U.S. Navy, and I've lived in Fairfax County for over 20 years. And I have 3 children that are currently in Fairfax County Public Schools. Actually, I think the number is larger than that, just because we have some substantial sized communities in Fairfax County, and we have well over 10 to 15 organizations and communities. So I might argue the number be larger than that. Very. Oh, definitely. No question. It's critical because for us, it's all about, there's a reason why we're here, and so our mission is clear. The fact that we have so many Muslim Americans here, it kind of helps us. We help each other and stand by each other to try to, accomplish our mission. I tell you, we asked a lot of, we did a lot of outreach within our community, and I would say the mass majority didn't know what it was, because it was a piece of paper that was in some kind of packet that came home with another book, and they didn't really understand it or even knew what it was. And so our community is fairly diverse, so there's many different languages that are spoken in our community. So it could have been that the fact that they didn't understand the language that it was written in, or they just don't even know what family life education was. I know that many, many, many families that I've spoken to about family life and opting out, they weren't even aware that they had an option to opt out of anything in school. They just thought if they taught it, you were stuck with it. No, I absolutely. I mean, it should actually be an opt-in, in my opinion, because the school system, and as far as when I was growing up, it was about math, science, reading, writing. I mean, that's school. We all thought that school was strictly academic until we were made abreast of the situation where gender identity and FLE and all of these processes in place. We had no idea. We literally had no idea.
Thank you to everyone who has come out.